Bill, thank you once again for joining me. I first interviewed Bill on the other podcast that I host at the University of Colorado called Leadership Frontiers. And we had such a good conversation that I just had to recruit Bill over here to the Forge. And so let's start off with this, Bill. I was trying to do the math and the numbers were just crazy. So you recently retired from the United States Marine Corps in 2020, so pretty recently. How long did you serve? Was I doing the math right? Was it like over 30 years?
34 years.
34 years. That's what I thought. That's a long time, isn't it?
Well, but they gave me a scholarship for college also. So you had to do things for the Navy/Marine Corps during college. So technically it was like 38 years, but 34 years of active service to the Marine Corps.
Wow. Thank you for your service. And man, that's a long time. I've had guests on here that have gone 24 years. And I always say that's pretty good because, usually after 20 years, the clock starts ticking of, time to get out. So you almost doubled that. That's amazing. Something that comes up a lot as we talk about this idea of transitioning from the military world into the civilian world, and a lot of veterans struggle with that. How's that gone for you? How's it gone? And do you have any tips for people that maybe are struggling with that?
Yeah, it was difficult because as a general officer, we have a certain number of billets for general officers in the Marine Corps that's established by law. We're not allowed to exceed that. What doesn't count is if you get sent to a joint position. That doesn't count against the Marine Corps. It's like it doesn't count against the salary cap. But I was nominated for a joint 3-star position. They picked the Navy nominee instead of me, and the Marine Corps was like, well, sorry, we have no seats left for you. It's time for you to go home, which was really abrupt, not what I had planned for, not what I wanted. But as you and I have discussed before, I believe in the Stoic philosophy from the standpoint of, okay, what can I do about this? Nothing. From the standpoint of trying to continue on in the Marine Corps. Okay, so what do I do now? It still bothers me to a degree, but I've tried to put that behind me as best I can and not dwell on it. I know other people have dwelled on the fact, especially the ones that are really good colonels, that don't get picked up for general officers because the selection rate is somewhere in the vicinity of 2 to 5%. I mean, it's really, really low. So a lot of really good folks don't make that transition, don't get selected to do that. And I know some of them have been very bitter about it and just had a lot of problems with it. And so I remembered that, and I tried to focus on, okay, well, what are we doing moving forward here? Part of that was coming to Arvada, my wife's hometown. My twin daughters live here. We knew we were going to do that. I was looking forward to that. And then the other part about that is, how do I continue to give back? And that's by teaching at the University of Colorado and teaching at the Naval Postgraduate School. And both of those worked out very well.
I think there's a good message there, right? You spent 38 years giving back, serving the country, and now you're still in that mode of service, right? Service to to our country, to young folks, and still sharing that wisdom. And I appreciate that. One thing that seems interesting there is, let me ask you this, Bill. Do you believe that we should live a life without regrets? And what I mean by that, I had somebody, that sounds great, right? Live a life without regrets. And I had somebody kind of challenge me on that and said, if you have no regrets, you're not living life right. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have regrets? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I have regrets, but I don't dwell on them.
Okay.
Because that's the point, is it falls into the category of, well, what can you do about it? It's in the past. You can learn from it and hopefully not repeat whatever you regretted in the past. But that's about as far as you can go. But there are people that just kind of dwell on it to the point where it just dominates their life. And gee, I wish I'd done something different, or I wish I was that person. Well, okay, where's that getting you? And to me, it's, you learn from regrets and you move on. And you don't really focus on them, don't dwell on them. You've got to put those things aside. And it's a mental effort to do that. It's a choice that you make instead of letting it dominate your life. Everybody has regrets. I mean, it's just a part of life. I mean, there's things that you wish you would have done differently, but get over it and move on. Deal with what you can, with what you can affect.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you're bringing up Stoic philosophy, because that is one of the big tenets. And actually, I just did a solo cast where I talked about this idea of control. What do we control? Control the controllables, and understand what you do have control over in life and what you don't, and let go of that stuff that you don't.
Yeah.
It sounds easy, right? But we see it all the time where people ruminate on things they can't change, they can't control, and I say that's wasted energy. I think you would agree.
Well, but it also has ruined people's lives, which is the
Oh yeah,
important part there. I mean, obviously there's no scientific data on the standpoint of how many people have committed suicide due to regrets. I suspect it's a high number, or a high percentage, but you know, the folks that haven't taken that step, but it still have let it ruin their life, going into substance abuse or whatever else to kind of deal with it. That's not dealing with it. That's just hiding from it.
yeah, yeah, and that's a good point. It could be as severe as, taking your own life, or
Yes.
just to wallow in that for a lifetime. Which, I don't know, maybe that's just a step above taking your own life, because you're kind of, ruining your life over a regret. So, um, what's your, as you spent so much of your time in the military, what's the biggest lesson from your time in the service that you are now taking into the civilian world?
Yeah. It's whatever you decide to do for yourself, the only one that can stop you from doing it is you. I mean, whether it's physical challenges, mental challenges, it's related to this podcast, the resilience piece, from the standpoint of, okay, these people are going to throw you curveballs. There may be some obstacles that you kind of trip over, but as long as you stay focused and keep after what you want to achieve in life, it's possible. The only time it stops being possible is when you decide, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore, or you know what, it's too hard. I'm quitting. I'm giving up. And that message, it's one that I try to impart to young folks, because things seem so daunting when you're young, but if you put your mind to it, just get after it and put your head down and focus, you can achieve a lot more than you think you can.
So what you're telling me, Bill, isn't life supposed to be fair? Is life fair?
Absolutely not. Never has
All
been,
right.
never will be. And that's another one of those regrets, is if, or the thing that people constantly bring up, it's not fair. Yeah, but whoever told you it would be?
Yeah.
It's
Whoever
not. Get
said that,
over it. Deal
yeah.
with it.
I think, again, I'm never going to pick on the younger generation, which a lot of people like to pick on the younger generation and say they're not strong, they're not tough, they're not resilient. A lot of my students have all of those. So I don't ever want to lump them all together, but sometimes I do see the younger generation saying, life's not fair, and, playing the victim. And I think you would agree that's never going to serve us well, right?
No.
Life isn't fair. And we're going to talk about Admiral James Stockdale in a little bit here, of a great example, a great role model
Yes.
of somebody that said, I'm not going to be a victim.
But somebody else, I just finished Dr. Condoleezza Rice's No Higher Honor. She started in Birmingham, Alabama in the 50s. That's where her life started out, segregated, horrible Birmingham, Alabama. That's what she grew up in. That's where she came from. And look what she achieved in her life, because she never used that as an excuse
Yeah.
to hold her back. I mean, just incredible. Obviously,
Yeah.
a lot of intelligence, a lot of talent, but my God, she could have just used that, and very admirable person.
Yeah. And what a great, adversity, obstacles. I mean, you can easily look at those in life and just make an excuse. Well, life isn't fair, and I'm just going to give up. And,
Yeah.
folks like that say, no, that's not going to be my history. And, they do what most people, don't think they can do. So I appreciate that you say that too, because I often look at my students, and sometimes I get weird looks when I say this, but I go, I don't even know you that well, but I can tell you that you don't know what you're capable of. I would say, 99% of the population, maybe not that high, but it's a high number that I think people, and I used to be one of these people. I didn't know what I was capable of. So I'm a big believer in let's move out there and see what we can do, because you could be the next Condoleezza Rice, or whatever you decide you want to do. One of the things that I'm excited to talk to you about, Bill, is that you read a lot, and I sometimes I think to myself, I've read well over 200 books, maybe 250, and it just pales in comparison to what you've done. You have you have a book list of 2,700 books and you read a lot. What drives that? Why are you such a voracious reader?
Because I'm convinced that I'll never, ever be smart enough. I believe that every book I read puts another tool in my mental tool chest that enables me to deal with the world around me. And obviously some are very specialized tools, but the more tools you have in your tool chest, the less chance you have you run into a situation where you're like, holy crap, I have no idea what to do about this. Life's complex. It throws a lot of stuff at you. You got to be able to deal with it. Especially that, seeing how other people have dealt with it. In the Marine Corps, we call it the 5,000-year-old mind. I think the other service may have a similar thing where you can take advantage of all the things that people have done right and wrong for the last 5,000 years that we've been writing about it by reading, or you can learn it the hard way through personal experience.
Yeah. Don't reinvent the wheel, right? It's kind of the way I look at it too. Here's the other thing that sometimes I get pushback. I mean, how much, so you've read 2,700 books, and how much of that do you remember? I think that the research will say like we remember about 20% or 10 or 20% of the book. And so what would be your answer to that?
Yeah, I think what it does is it helps enable better synthesis inside your brain. There's facts and other things floating around in your brain, most of which you're unconscious of. But when you're confronted with something, your brain starts putting things together based on your knowledge and experience, both actual experience, vicarious experience, and maybe more importantly, vicarious experience, because a lot of times your brain can't really tell the difference. You can come up with things so much faster, and you don't even know how that process works. It's if you have a deep base of wisdom from knowledge and experience, again, both types of experience, there's things going on in your brain you're not even aware of, but you come up with things. It doesn't give you answers, but helps you come up with answers so much faster. And again, you're not even conscious of most of it. The other aspect of that is if you really, really, truly want to understand something, reading 1 or 2 books on that is not really going to get you anywhere. What does is you read about 15 to 20 or more books on that topic, especially if it's very complex, all from different angles. You understand it so much better than just 1 or 2 really, really good books on that one topic.
I'm smiling while you're saying that, because that's exactly what my answer would be. Sometimes I'm not even, it actually surprises me how I come up with ideas. And I'm like, where did that come from? I connect dots, and this is not to be boastful. And I think this all comes from the reading I do, even though I don't remember every page and every sentence. I think it's bouncing around in my subconscious, and sometimes it just comes out and I just go, wow. So for anybody out there that says, hey, you only retain 20% of it, Bill and I are going to say it's still in there, and it'll come out when you need it. That's the way I look at it, and I think it's a wonderful thing. I'm a big believer in reading books. And here's the thing. I get this from my students a fair amount. And they go, do we have to read the whole book? Can we just, everybody wants the shortcut, right? They want the Cliff Notes or the shortened version. I go, no, you got to read the whole thing. So I kind of force them into it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a discussion with the author. I mean, it's a one-sided discussion. That author's talking to you, but it's laid out the way the author wants to express his or her thoughts to you as the reader. And so if you have a stilted conversation with somebody where you're only getting pieces and parts because of bad connection or whatever, how much of that do you really understand, as opposed to when you have the full discussion with somebody? All right, I understand now. I may not agree, but I understand. And that's why I think reading the whole book is so much more important than reading pieces and parts.
Yeah, that's kind of why I look at it too. I go, if you just read, there's apps out there for this, right? You can take a book and
there's an app for everything.
Yeah, so they'll turn a 300-page book into a 10-minute read. And I go, okay, now you're at the mercy of the person that created that 10 minutes. What they thought was important about the book may not be what you think is important about the book. So that's why
you need from the book.
I mean, what's going to resonate with me may not be the same thing that resonates with you, Bill, or anybody else. And so that's why I say we got to read the whole thing. And so I like to actually hold, and we've talked about this, I like to hold a book in my hands. I'm not a big fan of the digital readers. And I don't know. I know you agree, Bill, and I feel like we're gonna be dinosaurs. That one day you'll have to go to a museum to hold a real book.
I read a lot on e-readers, so I've
do you?
Okay. Oh, yeah. Mostly because I had to carry so many books around just to keep up. that, just so I always had something. And the Kindle very much helps with that.
The convenience of that is nice. You can carry around a lot of books. But I still like to default to my real books.
It's your comfort zone.
It is, and maybe that's my age group that I like that. I grew up with that. All right, so when we talked before, we talked about a book that I don't know. It's kind of I've read and you've read as well, and it's the book by James Stockdale. I'm holding it up if you're watching on YouTube. The Thoughts of a Philosophical Fighter Pilot. And James Stockdale's a fascinating guy for a couple of reasons. I mean, I think he's a great American hero. He was certainly a student of Stoicism, which interests me. And when he went, Congressional Medal of Honor winner, and what he went through during the Vietnam War at the Hanoi Hilton was really hard to kind of wrap your mind around. I've read some firsthand accounts of what they went through, and it's just amazing to me. So let's talk a little bit about Admiral Stockdale, if you're up for that.
Absolutely.
I'm pulling a quote from his book. He says, "In modern life, changing the world takes precedence over understanding it and understanding man himself." And so I would ask you, Bill, do you believe that we have kind of lost that ability to think deeply about philosophical things, like essentially what Admiral Stockdale is talking about here?
Oh, absolutely. Because first of all, to truly understand something, I believe you need to either read deeply about it or listen to somebody else about it. If you're trying to understand another person, listen to them. I think we've lost that skill. There are too many people that are in transmit mode only. They don't use the things on either side of their head. Somebody once said, you've been given two ears and one mouth. You need to use those in accordance with that ratio to really understand things around you and listen. But the other aspect is this facts at your fingertip culture that we have now because of social media and other things. You can look up any fact you want, and you always have it at fingertips. So we're data rich but knowledge poor. Well, what does that mean? What's the context around that fact? But if you can't get to either one of those things, either because you're unable to or unwilling to, how are you going to understand? How are you going to change anything? You've got a very superficial knowledge of and understanding of what's going on around you. And a lot of people think that's enough because of short attention spans or whatever else you want to attribute it to. That's not understanding. That's just awareness.
Yeah, so we got to go deeper, right? And
Yes.
And going deeper takes time. It takes work
and patience.
And patience. And I feel like we're becoming a society that we're impatient. We want everything, yesterday. Instant gratification. Yeah, and so obviously this is the premise of this podcast is maybe that is not helping us, and so maybe a little bit yeah, so a little bit more reflection, a little bit more of going deep into these topics, I think would be helpful for a lot of people. Let's continue on with Admiral Stockdale here. And as we talked about before we started, we talked about this idea of the Stockdale paradox. Can you explain that for listeners that don't know the Stockdale paradox? Maybe explain that, and maybe how, I see a direct parallel with the Stockdale paradox with what's happening with the pandemic. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, just a little bit more background on Stockdale is he was a fairly senior Navy officer and was sent to study at Stanford for 2 years before he went on his first assignment to Vietnam as a commander of a air group, which is a number of squadrons, all operating off of a carrier. And he went there to study. It was a technical, I can't remember the topic, but he got intrigued by philosophy, and that's where he was exposed to Stoicism, Epictetus, and others. And he said that was, of that 2 years he spent at Stanford, that proved to be most valuable for his 7 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, getting tortured, internal or solitary confinement. That's the word I was looking for, 2 words I was looking for. But that's what helped him get through that. And the way he talked about that, especially in his book, that paradox piece, was the people that didn't survive, the ones that mentally broke down the fastest, were the ones that were very, very optimistic. Oh, we're going to be released in a couple of months. Oh, we'll be home by Christmas. Oh, and then remember, 7 years as a prisoner of war, most of the people with him spent that amount of time, in some cases longer. The folks that were optimistic that at some point we're going to go home, But for now, we just kind of gut our way through it and just deal with what comes at us instead of, the crashing disappointment of we're going to be home by Christmas. Well, nope, there goes another Christmas. Oh, we'll be home by Easter. Nope, there goes another Easter. That just crushed people's spirit. And there's that one piece in the book where he talks about just after he departed his aircraft, he ejected, he's hanging his parachute, he's looking down at the ground, looking at the Vietnamese reception committee, waiting for him on the ground and thinking to himself, okay, I just left the modern world and now I've entered the world of Epictetus, from the standpoint of his ability to mentally deal with what he knew was going to happen. That was huge.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me because I remember that. And he credits Stoicism and his work at Stanford, just like you said, as being one of the bigger pieces for him successfully navigating that. So,
yes.
Which is fascinating. So this idea, I look at this as, okay, we are not a prisoner of war. Let's be very clear. We're not a prisoner of war, and going through what he went through and all those prisoners went through, which was incredibly horrible. But we're sitting here in a pandemic. Do we know when we're going to get out of this pandemic? No, none of us knows this. So I see a direct parallel here, and I think you do as well, that, have optimism that we're going to come out of this, but also know that we're just going to have to soldier on until that day comes, and we don't know what that day is. So don't let it break you, I think is the best advice I would give. Would you agree?
Yes, but I would also say don't fall for all the mythology that's going on out there, either anti-vaxxers or vaxxers or all the stuff that's going on. So many people are getting caught up in that instead of just focusing, okay, what do we need to do to get past this? What do we need to kind of help those around us get past this as a community, instead of people just losing their minds about whether they're required to wear a mask or not. People losing their minds about getting vaccinated or not. As some people, they've totally missed the point from the standpoint of, as a society, we need to get past this. And there's certain things we need to do to get past this and be responsible about it, not fall for, the mythology, hook, line, and sinker, because it's what you think you want to believe.
Yeah. As an armchair psychologist, I look at this as it's unfolding, and you can tell, there's fault lines here. People are snapping, that they're not able to deal with this pressure, and they're doing some very strange things.
Did you see the one where
something.
The lady?
What's
did you see the one where the lady went into King Soopers and she wasn't wearing a mask, and they had it on security camera, and then one of the employees like, "Hey man, please wear your mask," and the lady slapped her and ran out of the store. I'm like,
no, I haven't seen that, but I just read one. Yeah, somebody went into a McDonald's without a mask, and apparently he started attacking the divider that they had up, the plexiglass divider, and I'm like, what is wrong with people? Again, this is just, we can laugh, but it's actually not that funny.
I like what Tom Hanks had to say about it, though. Is asking people to wear a mask, is that really too much to ask? Seriously?
That's kind of the way I look at it. It's kind of the way I look at it. It's a nuisance. I've been through a lot worse. I've been through a lot worse in my life than wearing a mask, and so
I'm wearing a gas mask and exercising.
Yeah. Well, you've been probably through a lot worse than that. Let's continue, because one of the things that as I was looking, you sent me your list of your 2,700 books, which I love it, because it's alphabetized. It's all of them are rated, the categories, and I'm like, wow, what an amazing list. And I will refer to it, but one of the ones that popped into kind of my vision was the book by Stephen Ambrose, Crazy Horse and Custer. I'm fascinated by both of these characters from history that they had a little bit of a parallel path in history, and maybe didn't have as good endings. Both of them ended their lives probably not the right way, but what are your thoughts on that book, and maybe what are your thoughts on Crazy Horse and Custer?
Yeah. Again, Stephen Ambrose is one of my favorite authors. He is just amazing. The way he writes is just such an accessible style of presenting history to people. And I love his books. But Crazy Horse and Custer, Crazy Horse was very spiritual. He wasn't a recognized leader of the tribe that he was a part of, the Sioux, but he was a charismatic leader from the standpoint of people wanted to follow him. Didn't say a whole lot, but he let his actions speak for his work, speak for him. And a lot of people wanted to follow him. And, it didn't work out well for him because they were trying to fight in just an insurmountable tide of people coming west. They were warned about it by Phil Sheridan. And they're like, no, we're fighting anyways. And it didn't end well for him, unfortunately. Custer, he's one of those guys that drives me crazy because of his luck. I mean, he was commissioned second. He came out of West Point in 1861, second to last in his class, or last, second to last or last, one of the two, because he was a bit of a knucklehead, and then rose rapidly to general officer because he just did a lot of really reckless things that people call brave, got a lot of people killed. So then, and it was rewarded for it by brevet ranks, which means it's an award for bravery. They promote you to, you're not officially at that rank in the Army, but for the purposes of the war, you're wearing that rank, all the way up to Major General by the end of the war, which was 4 years after he graduated from college. And then he became an Indian fighter, and he did a lot of stupid things there too. I mean, you look at the battle that book talks about, Little Bighorn. He was warned by his boss, hey, don't go diving into this, that we think there's a lot more Indians out there than you may believe. He was warned by his scouts, hey, there's something wrong here. There's way too many of them. The camp is way too big. And he ignored all of them and dove right in. And some people attribute it to, he had presidential aspirations. Hey, one more big victory and I'm the man. I'm going to be, they're going to make me president. And he led about 200 folks to their death because of his inability to listen and use common sense. It drives me crazy.
Can we say what's the lesson from this? Maybe, as leaders, here's something that I want to throw out there. Is ego a good thing in leadership? One of the things that I like to talk about is ego is not all bad. I like to say that that's where our self-confidence comes from. And I want that in my leader. I want them to be self-confident. But where does ego get us in trouble? And maybe it got Custer in trouble. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. To me, ego crosses the line when it becomes more important, when you personally become more important than any other consideration, when it's all about you all the time, and when it drives your decision making at the expense of everything else. That's when it just becomes ridiculous. And I've seen it many, many times, both in my readings and then in actual life experience. One of the things that I tell young leaders is, hey, your biggest impediment to your success will be your own ego. It is necessary to have ego, so you have a sense of self, some self-confidence. But when it starts driving everything, you're just going to drive people away, and it will not end well for you. I guarantee it. And I've seen it over and over and over again.
I think that's good advice for all leaders out there. Let's go back to James Stockdale as we start to wind up here. Another quote from the book. He said, "The only way I know how to handle failure is to gain historical perspective, to think about people who have successfully lived with failure." And so what are your thoughts on not only that quote, but failure in general? How do you frame failure?
Failure is a necessary part of life. It's going to happen to all of us at some point. It's happened to me many, many times over the course of my life. It's not what happened, but it's what you do about it. That's important. How you deal with that. Do you learn from it and move on, or do you let it dominate your life? Thomas Edison is famous for, working on the light bulb. He goes, yeah, before I actually found the one that worked, I found over 1,000 ways that it didn't work. But I kept at it. I persisted until I finally was able to make the light bulb. And that's the thing you come across in history over and over again. I mean, Ulysses S. Grant was a complete and total failure, and some people think an alcoholic, right before the Civil War started. And he got somebody recognized, oh, you've got West Point experience. When they started forming volunteer regiments, they put him in charge, but he had common sense. Didn't lead with his ego. He was persistent. He ended up being president of the United States. He was the general that won the war for the North and then became president of the United States. And in 1860, he was working in his brother's, he was clerking in a leather goods store in Galena, Illinois, and was widely seen as a total failure. He dealt with it. He overcame it. Some of it was opportunity, but you can't let it kick your ass. I mean, you've got to be better than that. You've got to be bigger than that.
Yeah, I think, being, persistent, bold, dogged determination, as I like to call it. And there's a lot of lessons, or not lessons, but the stories of Abraham Lincoln. Same thing.
Oh, absolutely.
He had a
Yes.
lot of. I mean, the guy was never really the top of anything. He lost elections
Yes.
before and some people would call him the greatest president we've ever had. So
Yeah.
I
But
think that's,
also a reader. He had less
yeah.
than 2 years of formal education, was probably one of our wisest presidents, right when we needed him.
Yeah, I don't think we can emphasize that enough. I believe that leaders should be readers, and I'm not the only one that thinks that. And I know you're on board with that as well. I think we should be students of history, students of life, and be observant, curious. So all of those things, I think, will help you be a better leader. So um, I like the way you frame failure, though. It's part of the game, and what do we learn from it, and how do we move on, and just stick with it. I think it all comes down to that idea of just stick with it, just keep moving forward, right?
Mhm.
Um, as we wrap this up, I could talk to you for a while, Bill. But as we
Same
wrap
here.
this up, on the topic of failure, since we were just talking about it, let's go there with our signature question. What is your greatest failure, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, when I was about a mid-grade Marine officer as a major, one of the attitudes you get in the Marine Corps, probably other services, is I'll sleep when I'm dead. I can just keep going. I'll just keep going, pushing, pushing, pushing. Um, when I was training reservists in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I got back in my alma mater. I was getting a master's in residence. I was training reservists, which you had to set everything up for them. Busy job. And I was working on a couple other things, and I was sleeping maybe 4 to 5 hours a night. My kids were in kindergarten and first grade, second grade. Um, I was not a good person to be around. I was irritable because I was way overtired, and just kept pushing to the point where we went on a trip with the reservists, taking them out for their summer training. And I broke out in a really bad case of hives and was essentially in the hospital for a couple of days. And it was all fatigue related. I pushed it way too far. And as I normally do, I'm like, well, what the heck just happened? And I started reading about it, the accumulation of sleep debt and fatigue and the negative impacts that it has on you. And frankly, it was a failure on my part, but I lucked out because my wife put up with my crap and didn't say, you know what, you're an idiot, I'm leaving. My kids didn't really hold it against me. I was irritable. I was not a nice person to be around for a lot of that time. And by reading about it and understanding what I did and paying much more attention to ensuring that I got as much sleep as I could, it just, and we have a very similar issue with a lot of people, because in reading about it, sleep debt is an enormous problem in American culture, because people have so many other things they'd rather do than sleep. And it's car accidents, it's health issues, there's a whole laundry list of things that most people don't pay any attention to. And I like to think, because I did 3 combat tours with getting 6 to 7 hours of sleep a night, not always, but for the most part, because I was trying to make sure the tool I was using to make life and death decisions was as fresh as I could keep it, instead of being run down, foggy. When you're really, really tired, you get depressed more easily. Difficulties become insurmountable in your mind. Everything is more difficult, and you're making poor decisions, and people's lives are on the line. And so I like to think I learned from that, and luckily I didn't have any lifelong consequences from it in a negative way.